Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to New Earth Conversations podcast. This podcast is devoted to topics that inspire freedom and love. And recently, the focus has shifted towards women empowerment. All that, any topics that really help a woman remember her full power and sovereignty, her liberation. So today, we have my beautiful friend, Abigail Teixeira. This year, with this podcast, I just really want to highlight beautiful women in the community doing beautiful work in this shared mission of helping us all awaken to the truth within us and really just shine our full soul light and move as love through the world. So thank you, Abigail, for your part in that shared mission, and thank you for your unique walk and all that you've gone through to get from there to here.
Yes.
So I'd love to just open it up to you to tell your story.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on, sweet sister. I'm so excited for this conversation, and I love the work that you're doing in the world as well. And so it's an honor to be here and have this juicy conversation. A little background about myself. I was born in Mexico to parents who are from El Salvador on the way to Canada as refugees during the 90s and that violent civil war that was happening in Central America. And we arrived in Canada when I was 6 months old. So I'm basically, pretty much Canadian growing up here. I have two sisters, and unfortunately, I grew up in a very violent alcoholic home. My dad had a lot of trauma, from being a child soldier in back in El Salvador at the age of 14, losing his father when he was 14, and never really having the opportunity to like grieve or process any of the trauma that he experienced. Even from childhood, I come from a long lineage of just a lot of violence, poverty, addiction, abuse, silence, like many of us, cultural from different cultures, silence is a big one. We don't talk about, the real things that are happening in our homes, in our families, all of that kind of stuff. We just sweep it under the rug and we carry on. And so like most children, most people, they'll find different ways to cope with the pain and the trauma and all of that kind of stuff. And so for my dad, unfortunately, that was alcohol for him. That was his way of coping. And so lots of abuse happened in my childhood and a lot of disconnection. So like I mentioned, most children will find ways to survive the chaos and to move through the things that we're experiencing. And for me, one of the first things that I learned to do was disassociate, right? To disconnect myself from myself, to kind of leave my body in these really traumatic experiences. And I experienced childhood sexual abuse, and when I came forward with it, I wasn't believed, right? I wasn't believed and was told many things like, you're making things up, like this would never happen, all these kind of things, like basically being called a liar as a very young girl. And so what that told me was that it was no longer safe for me to, first of all, speak up and share my truth. And that what was happening, even though my body, my intuition, because children are extremely intuitive, what that meant was that, my body, my intuition was lying to me. I made that assumption, and so therefore it wasn't safe to listen to myself. And so therefore, that was where the disconnection really happened for me very early on. Like as young as 9 years old, I can remember having anxiety, depression, and just not wanting to be here at a very young age. And so that led for me to go into addiction in my teens. So at 15 years old, hanging out with, friends at school, and we all started drinking. And even though, it's part of kind of adolescent life, for me it was definitely not for fun. For me, what really stood out about drinking was the fact that for that moment in time, I was numb. I didn't feel anything, I didn't think about anything. I was free, I was able to be without any inhibitions or anything like that. And that became for me an instant addiction. So that became my coping mechanism, my strategy to just get through life and become this different person. Just immediately start wearing masks and, just become this life of the party and all of that kind of stuff. But meanwhile, I was deeply, deeply hurting. Still had all that, the wounds and the trauma and all of that kind of stuff that I was carrying. And I just wasn't looking at it. I was ignoring it and, just living a very fast life. And that continued on until until for 15 years. So for 15 years, I kind of went down that path of addiction, very functional in the sense that went to school, got my degree in nursing, had an amazing job, had my car, met the love of my life in my early 20s. We got married when I was 27, traveling, beautiful wedding, home, all the things, right? Like everything looked really picture perfect on the outside because, coming from, the family that I came from and all of that kind of stuff, like appearances were everything. I remember when it was close to me being graduating from high school, I wasn't going to have enough credits to graduate on time. And my parents didn't know that I had skipped all of grade 11. And so, when suddenly grade 12 came and I was gonna be short of credits to graduate, I was like, oh no, my parents are gonna find out that I didn't come to school, So like I went, and for grade 12, I had 7 a.m. classes. I filled my entire schedule to be able to catch up. And then I did it. I caught up and graduated on time, was able to walk on the stage and everything like that. And, appearances. So it was like, oh, she's good, she's doing good, and all this kind of stuff, right? And then went on to university and all of that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, so everything looked functional on the outside, and until my 29th, around year 29 for me, which if you're familiar with human design was actually my Saturn return. Makes so much sense that everything kind of imploded on me. And at a breaking point where I ended up in jail for the second time. So it wasn't my first time in trouble with the law, but it was my last. And that was really my rock bottom moment where I knew that if something didn't change, that I was heading to death. I knew, the path that I was leading, the double life that I was living was not going to end in anything good, right? And so just had that moment of realization, and I made the decision that I was going to quit drinking and get some help. And I had no idea what that was going to look like, but I was open and willing. A lot of people always ask me, like, how were you able to like navigate those first few years and like, all of that kind of stuff. And I said, I was just willing. I was just willing. Anything that anyone would suggest to me, I would try it. And if it worked, amazing. If it didn't, I learned, right? I learned that at least I gave it a chance. And so, I went on my healing journey. And then, after 4 years of that journey, I became a mom. And so my husband and I decided to have a family, and we basically had 4 kids back to back. And so now I have 4 children, and they're under the age of 7. And so very, very busy life. Becoming a mom I thought I had done some pretty significant work in my own healing and learning to reconnect with myself and learning to trust myself again and all of that kind of stuff. But nothing blew things open like becoming a mom, and then being able to witness certain parts of them in me, like there were certain parts of myself in them, and really understanding that I still had a lot of wounds, a lot of triggers, and all of that kind of stuff. And so, that was a big motivation for me because I knew 100% that I did not want to follow the way I was parented. I did not want to pass that on to my kids. And in order for me to do that, I really had to focus and take time to really learn, why are these things triggering me? Why is it so unsafe to like witness my kid have like a meltdown at 3 years old, all of that kind of stuff. And it was because for me as a child, it was not safe to be that way, right? To be a kid, to make messes, to spill milk at the dinner table, to have messy toys on the floor, the things that are just kid things, right? And so, that's when I really, really had to dive deep into like inner child work and all of that kind of stuff. And that began really my journey of deep reconnection to myself, my little girl inside of me, and really discovering what the roots of those wounds were, and then working on them diligently. And I've had a lot of help. I've never done it by myself. I've had a lot of support and guides and mentors and spiritual mentors and all of that kind of stuff that has really helped me through that. And then the other layer of that was my version and I guess my viewpoint around spirituality. I grew up in a high control religious cult. So, kind of deconditioning from that, and kind of reprogramming and relearning, unlearning, relearning, all of that kind of stuff has been the most profound work up until this point. Really understanding what spirituality means to me, what connection to myself, to the divine, to the womb, how that all comes together, all of that kind of stuff. And it's been really beautiful. beautiful. And through that journey has led me to the reclamation journey of my indigeneity. So learning about my background, my ancestors, my roots. Like I mentioned, my parents are from El Salvador, and so we have Mayan heritage, from those parts. And it was just this journey has been probably the last 2 years that I have really, really stepped into that reclamation and learning about where my ancestors came from, what their practices were, and adding that to my tool belt, of things that help me in my own journey of healing, right? And the fact that I am divinely protected, the fact that I am supported, and how to be able to call on that support and help in a way that is in right relationship. So it's been a really, really beautiful journey.
You were speaking to how motherhood really revealed those still tender places or those wounds, where there
Yeah.
wasn't resolution. And I'd love to hear like what the inner child work process, because I'm familiar with it in the way I am, but I'd love to hear what inner child work means to
Mhm.
you and how you've utilized that and how that's shifted the relationship with your children.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a work in progress. Like, I'm not here to say that I'm an expert in this because, like, I'm learning as I go. And first and foremost, the support that I've received from like various, mentors, guides along this journey is what has helped me to really reveal that these were a lot of inner child work, like a lot of inner child wounds that I had. So I'll give the example of when this really became apparent for me. So again, when you have small babies when they're born, they're very primal. You feed them, you change them, and they go to sleep, right? And it's just these primal needs. And so, it was yeah, I had postpartum depression with both my first two children, so there was that. But, for the most part, it was kind of peaceful to have this newborn baby in my arms and all of that kind of stuff. And it wasn't until they reached about the toddler years, so around 2, 3 years old, where they start to express their emotions, right? Like they start to become aware of emotions, like fear, joy, excitement when they don't get things their way, like frustration, those kind of very normal human emotions. And I can remember this one incident that happened. I was doing the dishes, and my two kids, my older two are very close in age. They're about 16 months apart. And so one of them would have been 3 and the other one would have been 2. And I was doing the dishes and they're running around, they're playing, and then something happened between the two of them that was extremely triggering for me. Like when I saw what was happening, it just like it took me aback. Where like I freaked out. I was yelling, and it was an automatic response. Like it wasn't like I was not like conscious in that moment. It was an automatic response. And it was scary. It was scary to me to respond in that way. And I was like, whoa. Like, and I could see the fear in their eyes. And when I saw that, it broke my heart because I recognized that fear. I know I've felt that fear, many, many times, right? So it almost like transported me to a time in my life when I've experienced that kind of fear where it's like, whoa, like, my parent is like really scary right now kind of thing, right? And so that happened, and then afterwards, so like because I've done a lot of deep inner work in myself, a lot of healing, I've become very curious as to when these kind of things happen. Instead of trying to, like, of course I'll go through the spiral of like shame, and guilt and all of that kind of stuff, but then I will meet myself with curiosity, and through that allow for tender compassion, because it's like, okay, this is an automatic response. I didn't have any sort of control in that moment, but why? Why is that? Like, why did I react in this way? And so, with some guidance, I was able to like do this, kind of guided meditation to kind of meet the part of myself where that wound kind of happened. And I saw a little me in that meditation, and met her, and then I saw it, and I almost like, obviously she still lives inside of me, and I felt, what it felt like in those moments, what it felt like, the fear and the confusion and all of that kind of stuff. And what it felt, the overarching feeling was the feeling of not being safe. Right? Like I wasn't safe in that moment. So then there was me, as an adult now and as the mother now, my nervous system, even though I'm, 40 years old, my nervous system was like 6 years old in that moment, right? And remembered like cell memory of what it felt like to have that fear. And then what I experienced was that it wasn't safe for me as a little girl to express myself in the way that my kids were now expressing themselves. And it wasn't that they were doing anything harmful or bad. They were just being kids. And what I really discovered was that for a lot of my childhood, I would get punished for being a kid, for doing kid things, like I mentioned earlier, spilling milk or, leaving a mess in my room or freaking out, like having a tantrum, if you will. Like that got shut down so quick in me as a kid, where it was like now as an adult, I'm experiencing and witnessing my kids do this. And I'm like immediately not safe, right? Like I'm going into flight, freeze mode, right? In my nervous system. And so through that curiosity, I started to discover that these triggers, oftentimes when I would get triggered by my kids, it was actually the younger part of me responding in ways that it had been trained to respond in these kind of situations, right? And so that's when really a lot of, like I said, tender kindness and compassion towards myself, my inner child, really had to come into play. And so I really speak on this concept of reparenting and parenting at the same time. So what I do now is I'm literally reparenting my inner child while I'm parenting my children at the same time. And, sometimes it's at a place now where it's actually kind of enjoyable and fun because I actually allow for my inner child to come out sometimes. And I'll even tell my kids, like, my inner child wants to come out and like my inner little girl wants to come out and play with you guys. Is that okay? And they're like, yeah, and I will do the things that weren't safe for me to do, now, like that it is safe, right? So like I will get muddy with them, like I'll paint and get it on my clothes and things like that. All things that were not okay for me to do as a little girl. And that's how I'm learning to like really again trust myself, to heal those wounds, to understand and recognize when the triggers are coming up, what I need to do in those moments and speak it out to my children. I talk a lot about emotions and that all emotions are welcome in our home. There's not a single emotion that is not allowed in our home. And so if you're angry, you're allowed to be angry, but the rule in our home is that you're allowed to be angry, but it's not okay to hurt somebody because you're angry, right? That there's different ways that we can transmute our anger, that we don't have to like hurt your little brother or your sister, whatever is the case, and all of that kind of stuff, right? And, we allow for joy and laughter and all of that kind of stuff. So that has been, the biggest work in my motherhood journey. And it continues to be. It's a lifelong process because as they grow up and as they reach different stages and different milestones, new memories come up for me, right? Like new experiences come up for me that have been hidden for all of these years. And so I always have to be conscious that that these things could come up and what's going to happen when these things come up. And so now I have like a tool belt of things that I do, right? Like breath work. Sometimes I just saying to my kids, listen, mommy's very overwhelmed right now. I'm just going to go outside for about 5 minutes. I'll be right back. Right. And sometimes I'll invite them. Like sometimes they'll be like, mommy, can we come with you? And if I'm feeling in a place where I feel like I can hold space for them too, I will allow for them to come with me and we'll do some tapping meditations, right? We'll sit down. I'm like, mommy's doing this to help me calm down, right? And it's really, really beautiful when I'm starting to see my kids pick up on these things and they're doing it without me even prompting them, right? Because when they're having these overwhelming feelings, I'm showing them tools to be able to work through them rather than shutting them down by force, by violence, like it was done to me. And that has been really the most significant part of my motherhood and a healing journey, that journey of reparenting and parenting myself, and learning to again also teaching them what it is to connect with themselves, to trust themselves, to trust that inner knowing, their intuition. These are all things that as I'm learning, I'm teaching them at the same time in real time. And I have this really beautiful story about intuition that I had recently with my daughter. So my daughter's 7 and I'm on a medicine woman path. And so I'm learning about, just, the medicines of the earth and like rituals and ceremonies and all of these beautiful things. And she's very curious. She wants to be with mommy and she wants to like, she asked me questions like, what is this? And I'm explaining to her. And so I like to work with Oracle card decks, for some guidance. And so I have like a stack that are my favorite. And one day my daughter wanted to pull one for herself. So I was like, oh, amazing. Yes, let's do it. And so we were by my altar and, she picked which one she wanted to pick out of. And so, we did a little practice. We cleansed first and then And then I told her how to set an intention. I was like, okay, so we're going to pick these up, and whatever question that you have or an intention, and so then I shuffled them for her, and then, laid them out. And then I saw the most interesting thing. She was just about to pick one, and then she changed her mind. And then she like went to another one, and then she changed her mind again. And I was just observing her, and then finally she like picked this other one. And so, it was still a very beautiful message, and but I noticed what she did. And so the next time I explained to her, I was like, I saw what happened there, with the cards. Like, you were gonna pick one first and you changed your mind. I'm like, why is that? And she's like, oh, like, she like said something like, it's like, oh, like I thought maybe I made a mistake, and I thought the other one was gonna be the one, and all this kind of stuff, right? And so I told her, I'm like, that little voice or that feeling that you felt at first with that first card, that's your intuition. That's pulling you towards that. We need to trust that, right? Like, we don't want to second guess it, right? And so we did the another card pull, and this time I told him, like, whatever is the first one that like draws you in or calls to you, that's the one that you're gonna pick, right? And so then she picked, and then the one that she ended up picking was called Breaking Generational Cycles. And I just like started to cry, because I was just like, oh my gosh, right? Because it was this beautiful, like, kind of full circle moment in that moment where I was teaching her about reconnection and what it is to listen to your intuition, things that I so desperately wish I would have learned as a little girl, instead of disconnecting and shutting down, and then having this lifetime of self-doubt, this lifetime of not trusting myself, this lifetime of just floating in the world and just being swayed by everything and everyone around me, instead of like really, really grounding and really rooting in my inner knowing, and that intuitive guidance and all of that kind of stuff. And so that has just been one of the most beautiful benefits of this work, of doing this work alongside my children. It's not easy work. It requires a lot of humility. And the last thing I'll say about that is that we have become very, very good in our home about the repair process. So when fracture happens, when something happens, I'm still going to have moments of overwhelm where I'm going to go back into that reptilian brain of like immediate response thinking, or not even thinking, just action. And so sometimes I will mess up, and sometimes, I will have an angry tone or something like that, right? And there will never be a time when my kids will go to bed without me acknowledging that and explaining to them, like, listen, the way mommy talked to you just now is not okay. It's not okay. No matter what you did, you don't deserve to be spoken to that way. And I'm really, really sorry, and I'm trying really hard to do better. And will you accept my apology, right? And of course, kids just want to be validated, right? And then like they immediately will say, "Yeah, that's okay, mommy." I'm like, "No, it's not okay." I'm like, but you can say that you do forgive me. I'm like, and I will do better, right? And then now I see them doing it with each other. Like, if they hurt each other, like, one of them will come up to me like, sorry, so and so, like, I feel bad for hurting you. And it's really, really beautiful to see that hard work pay off, and for me to be rewiring and really healing the lineage in that way, right? Because they will one day hopefully have children themselves, and it'll be just a little bit better for their kids than it was for even them, right? And then that's how they heal the seven generations after them, and then the ones before us, kind of thing, right? So
I love hearing how, as you're demonstrating a new way, like whether you're doing the tapping meditation when you're overwhelmed or when you're giving that sincere apology and making amends, and then witnessing how your children start doing that with one another. But then there's also this beautiful side where they're also demonstrating for you these beautiful things. Like when you mentioned the example of now you can paint with them and get the paint on your clothes, and it's safe and it's okay, and your inner child can express in that way. So it's just really beautiful as you're speaking to witness this reciprocity between you and your children, and this like parenting and reparenting the little girl within. It's just really beautiful. I love hearing about it. When you were coming into, you said that when you were a child, it wasn't encouraged to or demonstrated how to be in touch with your intuition. And you mentioned briefly somewhere in your introduction about the womb and coming into the womb. What has your experience been like in connecting with your intuition and the womb? Because the womb and the intuition go hand in hand. What's been your journey in that?
Yeah, well, I think for so many of us that grow up in kind of this Western culture where our menstruation, first and foremost, is something to be ashamed of, to be embarrassed, to hide, those kind of things really imprint in us, as women and femmes. And I can remember being 9 years old, and I got my period very young. So I was like 9 years old. And I remember just this immense, horrific pain that I had, like back pain, where I was literally crawling. And, I went to my mom and I was like, what is happening? Like, I was crying. I was like, I'm dying. Like, I'm bleeding. Like, what is happening? And of course, my mom had never had a conversation with me up until that point about what this was going to look like to expect it, all of that kind of stuff, right? She just, gave me a pad and was like, you got to wear this. And, and then that's it. That was like pretty much the explanation. And I was like, and then I struggled. I suffered. I had extremely painful periods for a really, really long time. So much so that, I had to go on medication for it, like painkillers, all of this kind of stuff, right? And now, with my new awareness and knowledge and all of that kind of stuff, all of that was like silencing, right? It was silencing my screaming womb, because again, like I mentioned, I'm a survivor of childhood abuse, right? That and part of that was sexual trauma. And as I know now, the womb holds all of that, right? It holds all that trauma. It holds the ancestral trauma, of the grandmothers and the great grandmothers and all of that kind of stuff, right? And so and our bodies are intelligent. They give us alert. They give us warning signs when things are not in alignment, right? And so for sure, that pain that I had and the horrific, like heavy periods, all of that kind of stuff was my body screaming that there was a misalignment there, right? And to further disconnect from it, I was prescribed, painkillers to just pop the painkillers and then that's going to go away kind of thing, right? And so part of my healing journey and part of my reclamation has been learning to listen to what my body is telling me, what the messages is it's signaling, and then learning to change my relationship with my womb space, especially as a mother. As I became and one of the most profound experiences was with my fourth baby. So I had an unassisted sovereign birth with him. And it was a whole story. And once again, I've been on other podcasts where I've spoken at length about that experience. But what I want to take away from that, in this conversation, was that I really had to learn to trust, like reconnect with my womb space, my baby, and my body, and to surrender and fully trust in what the signals were saying to me, right? And so, with my son, he was in my womb, and I learned to have this beautiful meditation practice towards the end of my pregnancy, where I really, really deeply connected with him. When I was like, okay, I'm trusting, like I didn't have ultrasounds, like all of that kind of stuff. I'm like, I'm trusting that you're okay and that you're going to come in your own time. And I would have, like, it was a nightly ritual. I'd go in the bath and I would cry because I was a little bit scared. I was like, I knew what I wanted. I knew the decisions that I had made up until that point, but it was still a little bit scary, right? Because I had never done something like this before. I had never fully surrendered and trusted in my body and what it was capable of doing, especially the birth process and all of that kind of stuff. And coming from birth trauma with my first daughter and all of that kind of stuff. And so, when he was born, I had this powerful experience where I literally feel like I opened a portal when I felt the energy of like the myriads of like the matriarchal ancestors were around me and surrounding me with their strength, that they had all done this before, and that's why I was here, right? And here I was, doing it again, with with their presence, their power. Just and so he was born in water, and it was just incredible and beautiful, and it was redemptive and just a very beautiful experience. And that really solidified my trust in myself, my body, my womb. And, I'm happy to report that finally, after years and years and years, I have a very different cycle, night and day difference, what it feels like for me to like be on my bleed, right? And there's very little pain, if there is, then again, it's something that I'm like, okay, what's happening here? What is my body signaling? What is it trying to tell me that I'm having this kind of, cramps or whatever is the case, and getting curious, right? And sitting with myself and exploring and trying to understand what it's trying to tell me. And usually, there's something for me to look at. There's something for me to pause and look at. And once again, with the reparenting, my kids, when I, first gave birth, like they were asking like, so like, what's this? And like, why are you bleeding? And all this stuff. I never ever try to like shame it or, shut them down. I will explain to them in ways that they can understand. The monthly bleed, I've already started to have preparatory conversations with my daughter that this is part of womanhood, and it's actually a gift, and like we don't have to be afraid of it, and we don't have to be ashamed of it. And once again, as I'm healing that in myself, I know that I'm healing parts of the future with her, and how she's going to look at it and all of that kind of stuff, right? And so yeah, it has been quite the journey, of really, again, reclaiming my connection with my womb space, and that it's something that I need to fear. And I've had cysts and all sorts of things, and understanding that this is all, once again, an indication that there's an imbalance, right? Rather than something to be fixed, something to be ignored or put a band-aid on, or numbed, all of that kind of stuff, right? And so really, really moving away from this idea and this space that I was so bound to in the past, which was numbing most of my experiences. When things were uncomfortable, I took a pill. When things were coming in my head, I drank wine. Like it was all these things, instead of like listening, like, hey, like, why is this coming up? And what can I do here in this moment? How can I support myself through this? Who can I call in to help me support through this? All of that kind of stuff. And then facing those things, healing them, and then being able to move on from those things, instead of it always like kind of being in the background and yelling at
Yeah.
me that something is not okay.
Yeah, it's amazing how the body really is always speaking to us, and it is infinitely intelligent. It always knows
Absolutely.
exactly what needs to shift in order to come
Yes.
back into its
Mm.
most alive state. I wanted to ask too about you're coming into your voice, because I've seen on your page like you've done multiple TED Talks and things, and I know you said in your childhood, it wasn't okay to express, it wasn't okay to express emotion, and a lot of that is vocalizing, right? Like as children, they vocalize a lot. So, what has it been like for you to come from that and then find your voice and to really allow yourself to be seen in your expression?
Yeah, I love this question because this is the most emergent journey that I'm currently on. I've been speaking publicly for 7 years now. And, people see me, if somebody just met me and they went on my social media, like, wow, she's just so vocal about things. And like, oh my goodness, she's healing out loud and all of this stuff. And I'm here to report that it wasn't always like that. It has been a journey, and it has been the most liberating journey for me, to be honest, because again, like I mentioned, I'm a survivor. And when I did in times past in my childhood, when I spoke up, it wasn't safe. It wasn't safe for me to speak up. There was repercussions. And so that imprinted in me and my nervous system the fear of speaking, the fear of sharing my story. And that led me to drink all of that. I had all this stuff bottled up inside of me with no safe place to express it. I couldn't talk to my parents about it. I couldn't, maybe my siblings, to an extent, but most of it was just really just stuffed down. It was very much repressed and all of that kind of stuff. And so when I entered into my healing and recovery journey, especially when I let go of the alcohol, I had to face these things finally, right? And so through a series of all sorts of different modalities, I was able to start to name the things that have happened to me, to like to share about them in safe spaces, like, with a therapist or in group therapy. And something that was so impactful for me was early on, probably the year 2 or 3 of my journey, I joined a group therapy support circle, and it was specifically for children who were survivors of childhood abuse. And so it was a small little the container. There was like maybe like 6 or 7 of us in this group, all adults, all from completely different backgrounds, but all of us, the thing that we had in common was that we had experienced childhood abuse or trauma. And when I started to hear, others share, and like we didn't go into like trauma dumping and talking about details. We just explained about how this had impacted us, right? How this had made us feel, and the coping mechanisms that we had all turned to, and many of us had turned to drugs and alcohol, to kind of cope with it, right? And I remember so vividly how I felt when I started to hear person after person basically take the words out of my own mouth, and share things that I thought I was the only one. I was like, oh my God, like I thought I was the only one that had experienced these things. And here are these people talking about their things that are very similar to mine, right? And it was like I released this heavy cape that I had been wearing of like shame, of like anxiety, of all the things, right? And then I realized, wow, I'm not the only one. And the thing that really stood out to me most in that experience was how I felt, how powerful it was to share our stories in safe spaces, right? There's this quote from, I think her name is Anne Voskamp, and it says, um, when stories are shared in in safe spaces, just like how powerful it is, how healing it is when we do that, and how it takes away the power that it originally kind of had, the hold it has on us, right? And so that really stuck with me. And so I had completely disconnected from all of social media and posting and all of that kind of stuff in the first 3 4 years of my journey. And then when I got pregnant, I decided to go back online, and then that's when I started to very lightly share my story. It didn't wasn't all at once. I didn't all just right away start sharing my deepest, darkest things, all that kind of stuff. It was in a way that was safe for my nervous system to handle. So it was like at 2 years or 3 years sober, making a post like, today I'm 3 years alcohol free, something like that. And then seeing what the response was. And it was like, okay, that was safe. People were they were supportive of it. And then gradually starting to share little more and more and more. But really, what fueled that for me was when I started to gradually share a little bit about my story. I started to receive from other people their Me Too stories, right? Like, oh my gosh, like you just put words into, you just named something that I thought I was the only one. And that's really what fueled and motivated me to continue to speak even more and more and more, to the point where now I'm an open book and I share very boldly about my life experiences, about the things that are taboo, all of that kind of stuff. And more people, who have the similar story, are gathering around me, right? And finding my story and finding my journey. And I've built like a community, of all these incredible survivor warrior women who have experienced very similar things that I have. And, we're learning to find our voice in a safe way. And that's actually what I teach, my current clients, is how to be able to safely express themselves and share in a way that is respectful to their nervous system, that is honoring their truth. One of my favorite topics to talk about is in human design, it's called the fractal line. And so we're not here for everyone. I'm not for everyone. You're not for everyone. We're not meant to be for everyone, but we are here for some people. And our unique medicine that we have is meant to touch a specific amount of people in our world. And that's the fractal line. That's like the sliver of humanity that we're here to actually influence and actually help heal with our unique medicine. But we can't do that if we're silent. We can't do that if we don't speak out about our story, because I truly believe that our story is our medicine, right? And so that's when I come in and I'm able to help support others, how to be able to share and speak your story so that it becomes medicine to other people, because this world needs so much healing. And all of us have these beautiful, unique life experiences that others so desperately need to hear and see themselves in you and say, wow, that person just has my story. Wow, I'm not the only one. Wow, look at them, they've healed. And so this is this beautiful full circle moment. And it's also not overnight. It doesn't happen overnight. This is a gradual journey, right? And road, and it's never ending. I'm still battling certain fears and all that kind of stuff. But again, I'm not doing it alone anymore. I'm not in isolation. I have support.
Yeah, our stories are medicine. We see ourselves in the other, we feel validated or feel confirmation, or if it's unlike what our story has been, it expands our mind. It helps us see what's possible. It helps us get out of our own box. And there's just so much beauty in being able to share
Mm.
honestly with one another and receive that. So thank you for sharing. I
Oh,
want to
thank you.
honor your time and bring the conversation to a close. But thank you so much, Abigail, for sharing your story and sharing more about how you came home to your intuition, your womb wisdom, how you came into expressing your voice and being seen, and that beautiful demonstration of parenting within and without. And thank you for doing the work and the play.
Thank you. But play is so important. Yes, we can have joy through this dark journey
Yes.
sometimes, And yeah, it's been a joy to have this conversation with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Alrighty, to all those who have listened, thank you so much. We love you. Until next time, bye for now.